Okay, economics, that's a kettle of fish, isn't it? When you think about it, people ask you, what does economics mean? What is economics, if you will? So economics, however you want to call it. To put it into most succinct terms, economics is the study of scarcity. And I have a note on here, think price. And the reality is it's not just price, it's anything where there's scarcity is present, where there are limits, and limits surround us, right? We have limited resources. Again, using Mick Jagger, who's going on 80 at this point, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you get what you need. That points back to Mick Jagger and his days at the London School of Economics. So there you go. It's all around us. Economics. Just like finance, whatever you want to call it. Economics certainly is then that study of scarcity. When you think of scarcity, I have a note on here again about price, and it's not just about price. It doesn't necessarily have to have a price tag affixed to it to be scarce. We have a 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, X number of minutes in an hour, and so on and so forth. We have limitations on virtually everything we do. We have unlimited wants. We want everything. We want all that there is of everything. Like the J.G. Wentworth commercial. I want my cash and I want it now. We want. The reality is that we can't have everything that we want, and thank goodness for that, I suppose. But anyhow, another quick point, just to throw a name out here, John Neville Keynes. This has to do with the idea of positive economics versus normative economics. John Neville Keynes was the father of John Maynard Keynes, who also studied under Alfred Marshall. Well, actually, it was Neville Keynes. John Neville Keynes was a colleague of Alfred Marshall, and John Maynard Keynes was a student of Alfred Marshall. I believe it was at Cambridge, but if I get it wrong, oh well. Cambridge or Oxford, probably Cambridge. At any rate, again, this is just one of those things in economics you run into where there's a definition associated with it, and positive economics is the study of what is in economics, the reality that we're facing, versus the normative side, where what it ought to be. It ought to be fairer, things like that, or it ought to be more equitable, or it ought to be, this is how society ought to look, ought to be, as opposed to the positive, and that is what the reality is that we are facing. Okay, so again, building up from that, the brass tacks, if you will, of economics as a study of scarcity. So typically people look at economics or economics as, I'll try to refrain from repeating that, economics and economics going forward, but the idea again is that people have a tendency to look at economics as more of a business in a business environment, but that is not true. That is not the case. That's part of it. It definitely has something to do with money and so on and so forth. But again, try to stick with that idea of economics in terms of scarcity, because scarcity is all around us. It's not just within the business environment. So starting from that point, from that idea of scarcity, now we're going to be looking at, this is something that is very simple, very straightforward, yet it's very difficult to kind of get your head wrapped around, and that is the circular flow of economic activity. This is at the basis of all economics, if you will. In fact, this is from whence all of the various strains of economics are derived. Whether we're talking about microeconomics or macroeconomics, or drilling down into those various aspects as well, to such things as labor economics, resource economics. Anyhow, this is kind of the root of economics. These are the guideposts, if you will, that are out there. So again, when we're talking about economics, this is the way it's set up, and you can see it in various formats, but we're really looking at four sectors of the economy. One being the household. In this case, it's on the left. It's the circular flow. And on the right is the firm. In addition to the firm or the firms, and household, there's also the government sector and the international sector. So those are the four sectors: the households, the firms, government, and the international. Those are the four sectors that kind of rapture arms around this thing that we call the circular flow of economic activity. Okay, anyway, so starting from the household, we're looking at the productive resources. The productive resources include labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and land. So what that means is that labor is pretty straightforward. That's us, our work that we're from which we receive, or for which we receive what? We receive salaries, some other types of income, wages, etc. And this is the labor portion of it. You could be receiving profit sharing. Okay, there's that part of it too. So it's not just wages and salaries. It could also be some degree of profit. So what you would be receiving for the use of your labor. Capital. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do capital. Capital is the physical capital. Capital meaning physical capital in terms of, just for lack of a better example, robots and automation equipment within a factory itself. All those things that go into the factory, including the factory itself, that would be considered that physical capital. And physical capital, of course, is owned by the household, the people, in terms of what? Drilling down on that physical capital down to the financial capital, that would be the ownership of the firm itself, if you will, ownership of that capital within that structure, within that physical structure itself. The owners, the root owners, if you will, of that physical capital, ownership in terms of equity ownership, which is the shareholders, stockholders of a company, or the debt owners, the bondholders of the company. And I'm not going to go any deeper than that at the moment, but just suffice to say that capital is again owned by the household. The household is the one that provides that capital. They're the owners of that capital. Next is entrepreneurship. The entrepreneur is from the household, going to the firm. They're the ones that run the firm. They are the decision makers at the firm. So whether we're talking about a single proprietor, a single small business, single owner operator, small business. So in that case, we'll be wearing two hats. One would be as the decision maker, and the other would be the labor that they're providing for the firm in terms of any wages or salaries that result from, they're in, I should say. Anyhow, that's the entrepreneur. So whether we're talking about the entrepreneur at a small business, or the entrepreneur like an Elon Musk, or the list is endless. And going back a few years, I would always throw in Bill Gates, but he's kind of fallen by the wayside. Nonetheless, these are all entrepreneurs. They are the decision makers at their firms. And I say their firms. It could be, they may not own the firm. It could be the CEO of the firm, but they are the decision makers. They're at the very tip top of the organization, along with the other like COO, the chief operating officer, et cetera. So it could be, again, a single person enterprise, or a multi-billion, or in the case of like an Apple, a multi-trillion, I guess, if it's worth well over $1 trillion now, I believe, type of an operation. Those are the entrepreneurs, the decision makers. They're the ones that are deciding what? They're deciding what productive resources are going to be employed, how much labor, how much capital, how much entrepreneurship for that matter, and also the land, which we'll be getting into in a moment. And they also do what? They decide what is actually being produced at the firm, the quantities and so on and so forth. So they have the, I dare I say, the most important role in this circular flow really kind of falls on the shoulder of the entrepreneur, because they're the decision makers, right? If they make the wrong decisions, or they repeatedly make the wrong decisions, they are ousted, right? I was going to say outed, but they're ousted. They're removed from their position, because it's one of those, it's a story of either You succeed or you fail, and if you fail, you're gone. And it's as simple as that. Because we, again, as the owners of that physical capital, as stockholders, shareholders in a company, we are not going to suffer a CEO, for example, that is not providing us with adequate profits. All these are interrelated. You'll see this as we go, but this is just talking through at the moment. So just try to kind of get your head wrapped around that. The last part of this productive resource is land. Land is pretty straightforward. It's the land upon which we walk. It's the land upon which we grow crops. It's the land upon which we drive our vehicles, what have you. Anyway, this is, I shouldn't say the land upon which we drive our vehicles, but you get the idea. That's the land that's out there. And land, of course, the payment for that land, the income derived from that land for the use of our land is what we call rent, which is, of course, it's kind of a loaded term in economics because there are lots of different types of rent, and we won't go there, but nonetheless, you kind of get the idea. These are the productive resources. And when we're looking at our circular flow, again, we're going from the household to the firm. And the inner portion of this, the inner ring, if you will, it goes from the household in the form of the input mix or the productive resource mix. There's the factor markets, all these different names for the same darn thing, right? This is what the productive resources that are flowing from the household to the firm. The labor, entrepreneurship, capital, and land. I like to keep the people up front, labor and entrepreneurs, and then capital and land. But at any rate, this is flowing through the input mix into the firm. At the firm, the decision maker, the entrepreneur, is making those decisions as to, well, how much of those different inputs, different factors of production are there going to be employed at the firm? Got it. So moving on from there, continuing that, closing the loop, if you will, the inner loop from the firm to the household. Those are the goods that are being produced, the goods and services, or the output mix, and what is being consumed, if you will, by the household. These are all the goods that are being demanded from the firm by the household, being pulled back again through the firm into the household. So this is the output mix. So that closes the inner ring. So next thing we're talking about is income. And this is something I've kind of been talking a little bit about it. You get the idea. Income is on the bottom part of the circular flow, flowing back from the firm to the household for, yes, guess what? Payment for the use of those productive resources. So income in economics is a very, very explicit expression, meaning that income is received for the use of those productive resources, the current use of those productive resources, if I may be more specific, meaning such things as like Social Security, et cetera. Those don't really count as income because you're not receiving them for the use of your current productive resources. You're receiving those benefits for what the use of your previous, historical productive resources, the taxes that you paid for those. Anyways, we won't go there. Income flowing back to the household, that is called the income distribution, which is another aspect of economics that you could get into great detail going through that. So what you'll notice on this lower outer ring, this income flowing back to the household from the firm, is that you see the arrows that are going off, including taxes and saving, and the transfer payments which are flowing back in. That would include such things as Social Security, et cetera. At any rate, so taxes are taken away from that income. So what happens with your income? It's very straightforward, but it's something that you know, but it's something that you never have formally probably heard or formally actually thought about it yourself. And that is that income is divided into three categories. First, you have to pay your taxes, right? The next is the consumption. That's consumer spending. Those are the expenditures. That's that portion going from the firm to the household where the household is buying that output or those goods and services from the firm. And the residual, whatever is left over, is called saving. So again, there's no S on the end of saving in economics. Why, I couldn't tell you. I'm sure there's a good reason, but I don't know what it is. So again, these are all what are called withdrawals, and we'll get into that as we kind of go through. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. So another word that I'm going, or expression that I'm going to throw out there at you. So again, that's income. Income goes to three places: taxes, consumption, whatever's left over, the residual goes to savings. There's a Latin term called ceteris paribus, or maybe it's ceteris paribus or something. Anyways, I've always heard ceteris paribus, so I'll stick with that, okay? And that means holding all else constant. It's kind of like in physics, if you're holding gravity constant, there's something, I'm oversimplifying it perhaps, but you get the idea. So anyways, that's ceteris paribus, and this is our circular flow, the inner ring and the outer ring going down. And the top part of this ring, flowing back again from the household, rolling back around to the firm, what you'll notice is this is actually on the top portion. So you'll notice that there are taxes on the bottom. Those are like withholding taxes, payroll taxes, etc., that are being taken out of your income at the household. But there are also other taxes. Other taxes would include such things as sales taxes, property taxes that are paid with your income. This is after you've received your income. You're paying these taxes. Those are taxes, and it reduces your ability to do what? To consume is really what it comes down to. And you'll also notice that imports on the left again as well, those are leaving the economy, and there's a specific reason for it, and I might as well say it right now. So imports and exports, we'll be talking about this more as we go forward. Imports are considered a withdrawal, taken away from the economy, causing the economy to shrink or implode, if you will. Likewise, taxes and saving, because if it's taxed away, you can't spend it, right? You can't consume. Or if you plunk it into saving, you're not spending it. So this is on its face. These are, I know that the taxes go somewhere. They feed the government programs, et cetera, and saving off, also goes to work in terms of being a financial being in terms of being a financial capital going to work for you, but leave that alone. And on its face, then these are withdrawals taken away from the economy. Imports are also taking away from the economy, because if you think about it, so imports and exports. Imports, where are the imports produced? They're produced outside of the country. And what do? We purchase those imports, and where does that money go? Outside of the country, in order to what? To pay for the use of someone else's productive resources. So that's why it's considered a withdrawal, where it takes away or causes the economy to shrink, reduces economic activity, because it does not stay within that domestic economy, as opposed to exports. Exports, where are they produced? Here. And from that, the firm is doing what? Paying for the use of those productive resources in the form of income, in the form of wages and salaries and profit, and in terms of rent and so on and so forth, flows back through. And so there are benefits, and there's good and bad about both, right? Imports are great because they help increase competition. But they harm us in terms of the monies flowing out and the use of some other country's productive resources, blah, blah, blah. And conversely, on the export side, they're great because we get the income in. We're using our productive resources. The downside is that someone else gets to use those goods and services that are produced. At any rate, again, withdrawals and leakages. And the other part, on the right-hand side, we're looking specifically at, on the left-hand side, those are the withdrawals, the taxes and imports. And on the right-hand side are the injections. The injections would include such things as investments, or gross private domestic investment, meaning the infusion of that physical capital at the firm, right? This is all that investment in terms of those, again, what goes into that firm. Next would be government expenditures, and government expenditures are considered an injection or causing the economy to explode or to expand or however you want to refer to it. I always found it funny in economics we say explode or implode, but anyway, causing the economy to grow. How about that? So government expenditures, yes, they are helpful because what do people do with their money? What do people like me as a professor being paid through the college that which I'm working, etc. I'm being paid with funds primarily, if you will, from the government. So these are government expenditures going toward my salary, etc. And what do I do with my salary? What do I do with my income? Like everybody else, pay taxes, buy things, consume, and hopefully there's some left over for saving. At any rate, that's government expenditures. That's why it's considered an injection or causing the economy to grow. Finally, again, as I mentioned before about exports because they're injections, because they're adding to the economy. They're adding income into the economy. The goods that they're producing are leaving the country or the services are leaving the country, but nonetheless, they are being produced here. Okay, that kind of closes the loop on it. I went a little further than I wanted to, but that's okay. Okay, so now, backing up a little bit, and again, we still refer to the circular flow with this, or we can, but looking at the two different types of approaches on economics. To start with, microeconomics used to just be called economics or economics, and that was it. Macroeconomics kind of came about after, we'll say 1940 or so it's been around a while, of course, but the idea was that this was actually applied economics, really, is what it came down to. And that means something else today, but that's basically what macroeconomics was all about, applying all of these economic principles, these principles from the microeconomic side. Anyway, so looking back again at our circular flow, which you don't have in front of you, but the output mix, that is what's being produced, how those products, those goods and services are being produced, are done through the input mix, meaning how much labor is going to be employed, how much physical capital is going to be employed. Entrepreneurs, is it something where you need some really heavy-duty entrepreneurship, guiding the ship, or is it something where maybe you don't need as strong of a leader to do this? Anyhow, that's all part of that input mix. And lastly, of course, would be land. That's all included in the input mix, how those goods and services are being produced for the output mix. The income distribution is who receives the goodies, who receives the income associated with the production at the firm, how much labor is being employed, how much labor is being compensated. That's the income distribution. And I'll throw Y in here, and that's just because I wanted to add trade. So Y being the reason for trade, meaning again that trade, whether we're talking about international or domestic, it's all based upon something that's called comparative advantage. So comparative advantage means that, okay, I've got here's an example, I've got a push lawnmower, not gas or electric powered, an actual push lawnmower. I don't, but we'll just say I do. And I've got a 2-acre parcel of land to cut. It might take me 4 or 5 days if I don't kill myself in the process, as opposed to my neighbor who has a nice riding lawnmower that could cut that 2 acres in less than an hour, for example. I'm probably exaggerating, but you get the idea. That's where comparative advantage comes in. Someone has an advantage over another. And there could also be something that's called absolute advantage. We won't go there at this point, but this is the basis. Comparative advantage, this is the basis for trade. This is why we trade, because both sides have to kind of benefit from that. It's really what it comes down to. One country might have lower cost in terms of their productive resource mix, or it could be some other rationale behind that trade, one versus another, but we'll talk more of that as we kind of go through the course. Opportunity cost, these again are expressions, ceteris paribus, comparative advantage, absolute advantage, opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is what you surrender or forego, your next best competitive option. So example of that is that, and this is a pretty stark example, but we'll just say a major league baseball player earning, dare I say, someone's earning $140 million plus a year. I forget. Japanese phenomenon playing for the LA Dodgers at the moment. Who knows? It could change at any time. Where he is phenomenal starting pitcher, and he's also like a Babe Ruth type of a home run hitter. Tremendous power. Earning $150 million a year probably at this point. But if you took that kid, and I'm assuming he's a kid, he's probably 25 years of age. I don't know. Maybe he has a college degree. You compare that to his next best competitive advantage, $140 million versus we'll just be generous in a starting salary of maybe $75,000. In Japan, maybe $100,000. I don't know. We'll say $100,000 just to be generous about it. So the opportunity cost, this is where the image of that opportunity cost really comes into play, your next best competitive option. So his next best competitive option to this $140 million a year salary is maybe $100,000 a year as an engineer or an accountant or something along those lines, okay? Again, being very generous. That's opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is something, and we'll be getting into this a bit in this class. It's more of a micro topic, but as we're under micro, so you get the idea. Anyways, that's opportunity cost as opposed to trade-off. Trade-off is you have one option versus another, and you kind of am I going to buy am I going to buy the Coke brand product or the store brand product? That's a trade-off. If you buy the Coke brand product, you might only be able to buy one can versus the other. You might be able to buy two cans. That's the trade-off that we deal with all the time. So they're similar in many ways, but there is a difference between trade-offs and opportunity cost. Opportunity cost measures that trade-off, if you will, and the trade-off is what we do, what we actually step out and do. Anyway, comparative advantage. Example, very quickly, already talked about my lawn mowing experience. Another would be like a lawyer versus paralegal. So you have a person who's a paralegal, they're the best paralegal. Those are the people that do all the legwork, the grunt work for attorneys, do all the research, do a lot of the writing. They're just absolutely, many of them are astonishing. I've seen some that are just absolutely amazing. They're probably much more competent than the lawyers that they're working for, but I won't go there. The idea is that you have a paralegal who's the best paralegal in the area, and maybe they're making, I have no idea, top notch. Again, I'm going to put a number on there that's probably wrong, but let's just say $100 an hour or $75 an hour. Better be it to err on the safe side, right? So they're a paralegal and they decide they want to become a lawyer, so they become a lawyer. They pass the bar. They go through night school and so on and so forth, and so they are a freshly minted lawyer. They don't feel very competent as a lawyer. They're probably an average lawyer at this point, at the very least, starting out. Nonetheless, this average lawyer is going to be making significantly more than the best paralegal. So if you are this paralegal, that's a recently minted lawyer, you would rather be doing the paralegal because you feel more comfortable there, but you would obviously opt for the lawyer because A, you've invested so much, but B, you're going to be paid significantly more for being a lawyer. That's comparative advantage in a nutshell, okay? Anyway, onward to macroeconomics, three-legged stool. Employment, we're looking at employment, we're looking at economic growth, GDP, gross domestic product, and finally price level changes, or what we're more typically used to seeing is inflation, right? So we're looking at those three: employment, economic growth, GDP, gross domestic product, and unemployment, if you will, or the employment side of things. So for December 2023, we were at 3.7 national U3 unemployment rate, and the U3 unemployment rate is derived from, I won't get too technical, but suffice to say, those folks that are unemployed, that's the numerator on top, divided by the labor force, so that the labor force would be equal to the employed plus the unemployed. So that is the denominator. And To be counted as U3 unemployed means that you have to be, one, not working, so you're unemployed, right? Not working, but actively seeking employment. So you can see where there might be a problem, hopefully, in that there are some people that are not actively seeking employment, whether it's because they don't feel they have to, not judging, just, stating the facts is that they might be not interested in working, or they can't find a job. There's a lot of that too, and they've kind of given up on looking for jobs. So they've relegated themselves to doing other things than actually being employed. So that's where there's a hole in this, and that it's lower than really what it ought to be. I'll just leave it at that. So we're at 3.7%. In December, Michigan was at 4.3%, a bit higher, obviously. In November 2023, we're about a month behind typically when we look at state numbers versus the national numbers. The changes from last year, the unemployment rate actually went up from December 2022 from 3.5 up to 3.7 in December 2023. But Michigan's actually went down a touch from 4.4% in November 2022 to 4.3% November 2023. Is this unemployment rate misleading? Yes, we've already talked about that. It's not picking up everybody that's out there. It's only picking up those people that are not employed. That's fine. But it's also, you have to be counted. You have to be actively seeking employment. Okay, so updating the unemployment report for July 2024, the U.S. U3 unemployment rate was at 4.3%. Michigan was slightly higher at 4.4%. This is quite a bit higher than it was in the previous year for the national, going from, again, 3.5 in July 2023 to 4.3% in, again, July 2024. Michigan went from 3.8% in July 2023 to 4.4% July 2024. And the question I have is, this unemployment rate misleading? What we have is the U3 unemployment rate, which is the quote unquote official unemployment rate. This is the one that's always reported in the media. And again, it's noted as a U3. There are other measures of it's called measures of labor underutilization. They go from U3, U1, all the way up to U6. And again, when we're talking about the difference between the different types of unemployment or underemployment, as it's referred to, U6 is a more comprehensive number, if you will. So again, for U6 unemployed, total unemployed, so that's the U3 piece, plus all persons marginally attached to the labor force, again, working part-time, plus total employed part-time for economic reasons, meaning that the people that they would prefer to be working full-time. Again, as a percent of you're still using the labor force as the denominator, if you will. Anyhow, I just wanted to kind of point that out. The U6 is probably a better metric, better measurement of what we would call unemployment, probably a truer number so far as unemployment is concerned. So looking at the employment situation, if you will, for just a specific month or a given month, it doesn't, just because you've got a good month, bad month, it doesn't necessarily mean, give you an indication where the economy is moving, at least so far as the labor markets are concerned. But what's interesting is that for the month of July, it really came across as a terrible, terrible month so far as the reporting was concerned. But that was because of the way that the labor report is actually characterized or published, if you will, or shown in the media. So without getting into too much detail, what happens is that there are two major surveys. One is called the population survey or the household survey, and the other one is called the payroll survey, or it's called the CES also. Anyways, it's the payroll survey. It covers larger companies with payrolls. It doesn't pick up the smaller companies that are out there, the small businesses and so on and so forth. Anyway, the idea is that the one that is kind of out there in the media would be payroll survey, where they're paying attention to the big companies, whereas the other survey, the household survey, the household survey, this one covers the entire economy. So it picks up small businesses, larger businesses. They're done differently altogether. But anyways, without getting into too much detail about that, looking at it, focusing on the household survey, which is, again, that's the one I see as the most important, because this is the one that's actually tracking what is going on for the entire economy, the economy writ large. So first off, we start with the civilian non-institutional population. So we're looking at the changes from June through July. Okay, so the overall changes, and these numbers are in thousands, right? So that 206 would be 206,000. So the civilian non-institutional population, it counts those that are 16 years of age and older that are not counted in the military or other institutional settings, such as prisons, nursing homes, any other institutional type setting where they're counted separately. Anyhow, so that's the civilian non-institutional population. So the overall population is about 335 million, and the CNP, or the civilian non-institutional population, in this case is 268,000, right? The labor force, which is a component of that civilian non-institutional population, counts the people that are employed plus those that are unemployed. So employed, of course, is pretty straightforward. Unemployed is equal to the people that are not employed but are actively seeking employment. That's U3 unemployed. Okay. So the next component now we look at is labor force participation rate, and that is trying to figure out the employed, the unemployed. So employed people that are working, unemployed people that are not but are looking for work, divided by the CNP, that civilian non-institutional population. So these are important ratios. Next, of course, is the employment population ratio, which is the employed divided by that CNP again. And finally, that U3 unemployment rate, again, is the unemployed divided by the overall labor force. So looking at it from the CNP piece on top, the difference between June and July, 206,000 gone up. So this is normal. Typically it grows by about 200,000 a month, anywhere from 150 to 200. And they make adjustments on this one in particular as it kind of moves along, but that's pretty standard. that the people that are entering into that civilian non-institutional population, people that are 16 years of age and older, right? So typically it's that piece, or people that are being reintroduced perhaps from the military, et cetera, coming out of prison that pop back into the CNP. The labor force increased by 420,000. So this is a very good number, because what we're saying is that it went well beyond what? Went well beyond that CNP, or the civilian non-institutional population. So where did these people come from? They came from outside of the civilian non-institutional population. And you'll notice that number on the bottom, that the number on the bottom, the non-labor force component, that is the piece that pulled back in. So people that are coming off the sidelines, that are coming back into the labor force, right? So this is a good number. Anyhow, labor force participation rate increased by 0.1%, and this is a significant number because the labor force participation rate measures what? It measures the people that are out there looking for work, unemployed, but actually seeking employment, and also the employed. So that number went up, and we're at 62.7% right now, and frankly, that number could and should be significantly higher than that. So that tells me that there's room for what? More growth so far as the labor force is concerned, regardless of what we see in terms of unemployment rates. The next piece down, we're looking at the overall employed. Overall employed increased by 67,000, so that's a good sign. But when we look at that versus the unemployed, so the two together get us to that labor force, remember? So the unemployed number increased significantly, 352,000. However, that could indicate one of two things, right? One would be that more people are actively seeking employment and are eager to get back into the labor force, or the other downside, which would be that more people are being laid off. And in this case, I'm not really sure which it is. it may well be that people are actively looking for more, more people coming into the workforce for a variety of reasons. Anyhow, this just wanted to walk through that. So again, when we're looking at this, at the labor force, at the monthly labor report, this monthly employment report, this is the number. What we're looking at here is we're tracking from month to month to month, going on a monthly basis, going through all those categories. The civilian institutional population, again, being at 268,000. 260. This is in thousands, so that's 268 million. And then breaking it down to the labor force, the folks that are employed plus that are unemployed as a subset of that civilian institutional population, being at 168,400,000. Then that participation rate being at 62.7%. And the employed number, again, out of that labor force, that total number, 161 million. Employment population ratio being at 60%, which is a good number, but it actually went down because more people were moving into the labor force, correct? You get that? Anyhow, regardless, so the unemployed increased up to 7.2 million. Unemployment rate also increased significantly, actually going from 4.1 to 4.3. Remember, when we're talking about ratios, there's just a small bit can make a big difference when we're looking at 335 million population in the U.S., right? The not in the labor force is still over 100 million. So this is an important number. So what that means is that out of our 335 million population, we have a significant number that are not in the labor force. So that we want that number to come on to be driven down below 100 million, and that's a tough one because of what? Because of a lot of baby boomers are moving into that, not the labor force component, if they're moving into their retirement years, their golden years, right? Okay, so moving on, what we want to take a look at is economic growth. This is one of the things that we're always very, very concerned about. And the one that we focus on is called the GDP. And that is that the gross domestic product, which measures the final value of all goods and services at market prices over a given period of time. So this is the number that we key on. And one of the main reasons that we want to focus on something like the GDP is that not far down, drilling down into that GDP number is our national income. And that should be something of importance to all of us, meaning that we all want to see what? The income rising, all incomes rising, especially our own, of course, but it's a good sign when incomes are rising. So the faster GDP grows, the more income, the more our income grows as well. Anyway, so there are different ways of measuring, usually measured on a quarterly basis, or it is measured on a quarterly basis by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And at any rate, which is it's a bureau, which is a department, if you will, under the census, under the Department of Commerce. Census is also a part of Department of Commerce. At any rate, so GDP, it rose slightly, if you will, in the second quarter, and I'm having a hard time reading my eye chart here on the right, but it did increase. And this, when we measure things on a quarterly basis, this is on a quarterly basis, but annualized, meaning how it would look for if that quarter stood for an entire year, how much it would be. Anyhow, the idea again is that we measure a quarterly basis, and typically what we want to do is look at it on an annual basis. We want to see how the GDP grows, how quickly the economy grows. And so what you'll notice, and again, this is rather small, but what you'll notice is that the economy, it hasn't really grown all that much. You could say how much is enough. Typically, we look at a good economic growth being at around 3%. Doesn't sound like much, but it's pretty healthy growth. The problem is that aside from going back to like 2005, we really haven't popped over that 3%. We may have, because of adjustments going back into, I guess it would have been in 2018, 2019, it may have popped 3%. And what you'll notice is that it jumped significantly in 2021, but that was the bounce back from COVID from 2020 when it really dropped off the board. So you put the two of them together, you do not have any outstanding growth, if you will. Anyhow, so that's economic growth. Moving on from there. Oh, anyhow, this is a better picture. I should have done this, blown this up a little before, but at any rate, so what we're looking at is that this is the quarterly GDP growth on top and then the annual on the bottom. And yes, in 2018, we did have 3%. But keep in mind that prior to this number in 2018, the last time that we had over 3% growth, and I don't have it on this chart here, was back in 2005. So we have a ways to go here, folks. This is something to keep in mind. The bad news is that we're not growing that fast. The good news is that we can, with the right conditions, with the right policies, economic policies, helping to aid this, if you will, this process. So that's measuring economic growth, one of the three legs of macroeconomics, or is things that we pay close attention to on our in the media, so on and so forth. Economic growth, GDP, price level changes, inflation, and also the employment piece, how the labor markets are doing. Yep. So again, anyhow, this was the percentage change in the quarterly. This is annualized growth so far as GDP is concerned. Another bar chart, a little easier to kind of see. Again, pointing to 2018 when we actually did hit 3% growth for the year, and we hope this is going to be a recurring theme going forward. But again, it all depends on how the economy is growing in different, so things within our economy domestically, and also that wonderful world outside that is constantly changing as well. Okay, so now moving on to price level changes. And in this case, we talked about we spoke before about the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that's under the Department of Commerce. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is under the Department of Labor. And this is where we get all of our what's called macro data, the stuff that we kind of pay attention to. Micro data would be such things as, crop yields, and we could go on and on about that, but, looking at one specific segment as opposed to this macro look, which is the overall economy, if you will. At any rate, so this numbers from the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, these are published on a monthly basis as well. And we're looking first at the consumer price index, and this was what the consumers are paying for those goods and services, if you will. And so looking at it from going from July 2023 to July 2024, we had an increase of 2.9% overall inflation. And again, of that, when we look at just looking at what's called so-called core inflation, we take out food and energy. The reason we do that is that food and energy tends to move quite a bit. It slides up and down quite often. So we want to try to get a better picture of everything aside from food and energy, and that increased by 3.2%, which it's an improvement. We should be doing a bit better than that, but we're moving in the right direction, if you will. Definitely not in the as high as it was just a year or two ago. So again, when we're looking at CPI, this is a little bit of a bar chart looking at it again just for that specific month. And again, we're looking at this annualized, right? So we're looking at from the year, the 12-month period before, leading up to this July 2024. All items a shade under 3%. Food is lower and energy is lower. So if we remove those from the all items, it's going to drive up that all items less food and energy. So what this tells us is that food and energy are below this overall all items part of the CPI. Again, the consumer price index, that measures prices at the consumer level, the ones that we are most concerned with, of course. So this is what we're looking at here is this is a graph over time going back annually, looking at the change in the CPI, that price index, right? The consumer price index. And it's kind of broken down. There are different components that kind of go in, just for an example, what goes into all items, all the different component parts that kind of build up to that. But the takeaway from this is that if you look back, we would have seen inflation over the course of the last 10, 15 years, kind of hovering not that high, between anywhere from 2 to 3%, up to 5% at some point. But we really had a huge bump in 21 and 22 and 23 for that matter as well. So what was this all about? This was all about the stimulus spending, a lot of things that went into that on the consumer side, where there was more money in the economy, more money chasing fewer goods in some cases because of the supply problems that we had. If you recall, looking at like car dealerships, probably up until about a year ago, they never had any new vehicles on the lot because there were none available. That's changed, of course, but this is an example of what we saw that was going on. This should give you an idea. So it had gone quite high. And again, historically, this is a high number, okay? It's not to say we haven't been this high before. We've been close to this, but that would have been going back 30, 40 years, actually. 40 years or so. So again, on the left-hand side, we see that tremendous hump where that inflation was popping through and starting in 2021 and continuing on into 2023. But when we have to ask ourselves, why does it hurt so much? And this is just an example of kind of what was going on prior to COVID, if you will, and then post-COVID. And so July 2017 through July 20th, we had cumulative CPI increase of 5.9%. So over that 3.5-year period, roughly 3.5 years, we had a 5.9% increase overall in our CPI prices overall, as opposed to going forward from February 2021, trying to look at comparable periods through July 2024, that cumulative price percentage change was 19%. So this is why it hurt so much, because overall prices have risen over that period of time by, again, 19%, close to, you can just round up to 20%. And so moving from 6% over 3.5 years to 19% over this other 3.5-year period. This is where why we've experienced all these price increases, and whether you're talking about buying, fast food or paying for insurance, anything and everything that you can think of, prices have certainly gone up significantly. So we were looking before at the consumer prices, what the consumer paid for prices, and it's also important, of course, to see what the producers, what those companies are paying for their prices, because and the way it works is that a company does what? They produce something and then they pass along the cost of that production to the consumer. I'm not saying that there isn't profit, but the point is that at the very least, what you're going to be charged is the cost of that product. And so if the prices go up at the producer level, prices will typically rise again at the consumer level, depending upon how much competition and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, anyway, so in July 2024, the inflation, the price level increase, the inflation was 2.2% over the previous 12 months on the producer price index side. And also very similar to what we saw with the CPI, the consumer price index, we saw a huge jump going back from 2021 through well into 2023, where we had prices significantly higher on the producer price index side. Okay, so again, this is a picture of inflation. And unfortunately, who has to pay for inflation? Ultimately, it's going to be the consumer. It's going to get to the consumer one way or another, if not in total, at least a good portion of what the producer experienced in price increases is going to be passed on to the consumer, again, depending upon what? Depending upon how much competition there is. Okay, so onward we go. Now we're looking at the debt. So when we talk about the debt and deficit, those are terms that you probably have heard. The distinction between the two is that, think about it this way. The debt is what we owe overall, that $34.1 trillion as of January 2024. Huge, huge numbers. The change from one period to the next is when we have deficit, stay the same, or surplus, basically. So basically, deficit or surplus. Deficit means that we're spending more than we're taking in, or a surplus means that we are taking in more than we're spending. So we have some left over. Think about it in terms of our income. Again, take away the taxes. That's what this is driven by. This is at the federal level we're looking. So the income that the Fed gets, that the federal government gets in the form of tax revenues, minus the expenditures. And if it's a positive number, then it's a surplus. If it's a negative number, it is a deficit. So we're running deficits, no surprise. And this is what's driven us up to this 34.1 trillion, going back 10, 11 years, I guess. January 2013, I guess that's actually 12. Anyhow, no, it's 11 years, but sorry. So 16.4 trillion, and it's more than doubled up to 34.1 trillion. What the heck, man, right? A lot of reasons behind it. Is it a reason to be concerned? Yes, absolutely. Why is that? The biggest reason is that when it comes down to it, that we have to pay. It's not that we're going to pay this debt off. It's going to continue to rise, and for a variety of reasons. But we have to what? We have to service the debt. We have to pay the interest on that debt, and that's going to pose problems. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, so again, when I mentioned about the, paying the interest on the debt, this is a problem that we're encountering right now as we speak. So the annual payment of the interest on the debt. Remember now, this is when we pay the interest on the debt, this is a line item in the federal budget. So this is something that we have to do every year. We have to, we're paying this money out of our current budget. So this has to be funded either through the taxpayers in total or further deficits, increasing more deficits, borrowing more money in order to help pay for that debt, pay for that, that interest on the debt. So in this case, again, we're looking back to the year 2021, and these are the fiscal years that run again from October 1 through September 30 of the following year. So the 2021 fiscal year would go from October 2020 through September 30th, 2021, and 2022 would be starting in October 1, 2021, going through September 30th, 2022, and that went up to $710 billion. And in 2023, we will be at $1 trillion, or darn near $1 trillion. And that number is likely to continue to rise going forward. And there are reasons for it, but won't really touch upon it at the moment. But keep in mind, when we talk about the average maturity on the debt, that means that when the debt has to be redone, meaning you've got to go out and let's just say you're buying a car and you get a 3-year, 36-month, you have a 3-year, 36-month note on the car, but the reality is it's only on half of the car. So you've got to go back out after it covers half the payments of the car. After that 36 months, you have to get another loan in order to take care of that loan going forward. And that's basically what we're talking about, except that this is ongoing, meaning this debt, we already realized the debt is not going to go away. It's going to continue to rise. So we have to figure out some way to do what? To finance the debt going forward. Okay. Okay, so the biggest driver behind this move, this higher interest rates, as we're looking at on the debt, the weighted average maturity and the weighted average interest on that debt, if you will. It's moved from 2.7, actually, we'll go back to 2022. It was at 1.5%. July 2023, it had moved up to 2.7%. Now in December, it's 3.11%. This is all driven by what? Higher interest rates out there in the markets. Because what happens is that when the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, remember, U.S. Treasury, they're the keeper of the coin, right? They're the keeper of all of our money. Guess how much money that the U.S. Treasury has? You guessed it, negative 34.1 or $2.2 trillion at this point. Now, don't worry, that number is going to go up. So all they're doing is tracking this, our loan, if you will, or the lending that's going on, the borrowing, I should say, rather. So again, that is going up, and the reason it's going up is because the interest rates are going up in general, as we know, and that's driven by monetary policy from the Federal Reserve. We won't talk about that now, but that's kind of at the root of this that's driving these interest rates up to our detriment as taxpayers, because we're the ones that have to foot this bill. This has to be funded through our budgets, our annual budgets, if you will, Again, the duration or how long it has to be until we roll over or paid off our debt. And again, we're never going to pay this off. So our overall, our overall marketable debt that's out there, that $34.1 trillion, we'll just say not all of it's marketable, but point is that $34.1 trillion, that has a shelf life of 74 months, okay? So we're talking about 6 years and 2 months, right? So 6 years and 2 months, all that debt will be rolled over, that $34.1 trillion. And again, the unfortunate part of this is that we are going to, one, add more to this debt, this overall debt, so it's going to go from 34.1 trillion up to a higher number anyway. And in addition to that, the interest rates are higher than they were. So if that means that the payment of interest on that debt is also going to do what? Go up higher, 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 higher. And that is something that is that's absolute catastrophe, a disaster for us as a nation, right? Anyway, these are all things to kind of keep in mind. And yes, they call economics the dismal science, and it's for a reason, because a lot of this stuff is not good news. It's not pleasant to hear. It's not pleasant to even scratching the surface understand. It's very difficult to swallow some of these things, but this is the reality that we have. Better to know this stuff, better to know you're better off knowing this stuff than not. I'll leave it at that. I know it doesn't feel that way, but at least you won't have to wonder about it. You will understand a bit of this stuff again going forward. Okay, so again, this is just another image of that weighted average maturity. And yes, we've had, it's good actually that we have this long of a maturity, because that means that a good portion of our debt is not going to re-up at higher levels, that as high as interest rates are right now, fortunately. But the unfortunate side is that a good portion of our debt is rolling over forthwith, as in within this next year going forward. And again, lucky us, in this case, we're talking about 31% of our debt having to be refinanced in 2024. And I don't know if this is the annual year, as in January through December 2024, or October 1 through September 30, 2024. In any event, this is a painful pill to swallow, because it's 31% or $7.6 trillion will mature over the next year, meaning that since we're not going to pay it off, that $7.6 trillion, we are going to have to do what? We're going to have to borrow. Again, we are going to have to borrow at higher and higher rates. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and that is this a problem? Is there a problem here? And this is something, again, that we'll be talking about kind of going forward in the class, but clearly this is an issue. This is a problem. How do we solve it? It's a simple math problem, really, right? But the question is, or I should say, the difficulties come down into actually taking our medicine, meaning to cut back on our spending, perhaps, B, further taking our medicine by raising taxes to pay down this debt, or to at least offset the deficits to keep us out of deficit territory. So there are a lot of options out here. There are a lot of things to consider. Just keep that in mind as we go forward in the class.